UK inflation rose unexpectedly to 3.6% in June, the highest since January 2024, driven by high motor fuel and food prices, the Office for National Statistics reported. This surprised analysts who forecasted no change from May's 3.4%. The inflation spike follows 2 months of economic contraction and comes amid US tariff tensions, piling pressures on PM Keir Starmer's government, while Finance Minister Rachel Reeves acknowledged ongoing cost of living struggles. Analysts believe the Bank of England may still cut interest rates in August, despite rising prices, given the UK's sluggish economic growth and broader financial challenges. Dr. Gospel Obele, economist, is joining us now from London, UK. Good morning. Great to have you in.
Hi, Jonah. Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here.
Yes, it's a pleasure. I'm going to start with a selfish question, right? How is this spike in US inflation, or UK inflation, I beg your pardon, going to affect us here in Africa?
Well, to start with, you've got a lot of UK and Africa trade relations ongoing. Significantly, many African economies still depend on imports as well to run the local economies. And so technically lots of import and inflation, and lots of also trade conversations would have been going that might impact on the bottom line in terms of prices of goods and services. And not just a UK argument, the broad landscape of trade relationships with Nigeria and the broad landscape of imported, quote-unquote, imported inflation, because the trade conversation is a global conversation. And what's happening right now is stakeholders are beginning to hedge against risk, necessary or possible risk in future trade tensions or changing trade tariffs. And what that simply would mean would be that people will begin to hedge against those risks by increasing current stock prices or current inventory prices, which would technically also impact on imported inflation and all that, and the dynamics of local inflation as well. So there is a potential. But for Africa, or with Nigeria to a large extent, it's such that the inflation narrative is more structural than just monetary in context. And even globally, actually, we've gone at days where, inflation is now being driven by, the amount of money supply or, the basic definition of too much money chasing few goods and all that. It's now a more, there are more issues around structural tensions, geopolitical tensions, geoeconomic tensions, like we've seen with the trade narrative. So, we expect that there will be quite some interesting dynamics around imported inflation, and hence reasons why Nigeria needs to sort of begins to build its necessary its arsenal against the trade shocks that are coming.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that dynamics in inflation play out in the UK. We'll come back to how Africa and Nigeria should move in the light of UK spiking inflation. But we are seeing the Bank of England, they are still expected to cut interest rates in spite of this higher than expected inflation number, the rise in inflation. Give us a picture of what's happening with this dynamics, because usually, typically, inflation is going up, you don't cut interest rates. So what's happening here?
Yeah, so to start with, gone are the days where, the inflation of the global economy that we live in are driven strictly and only by by economic forces or economic variables. So, quote unquote, when all things being equal, Bank of England or central banks would generally want to increase interest rates to try to bring down inflation. But we saw that, in the past previous years, whilst that was done significantly, it did not necessarily bring down inflation. In some climes, it brought down the numbers, but it led to what we term as the inflation, led to what we term as a rising cost of living crisis. And whether or not inflation is up or down, we've seen globally in the world, there's been a rising cost of living crisis. All right, so it's got to do with the inflation numbers per se. The inflation numbers just follow the dynamics of geoeconomics and local economics and all those interesting things. But in terms of the day-to-day experiences of people, living, having a life, having a roof over your head, healthcare, transportation, food, and all that, prices have significantly gone up. So technically, inflation never really went down, whether in the UK, Nigeria, or in the US, all right, because cost of living always went up in the last 5 to 6 years. What has happened is that figures have changed by virtue of the impact of the interest rate dynamics. But the reasons why, prior to 2027, 2028, 2025, when you introduce interest rates, it will significantly bring down inflation regardless of the economy where you live in. The reason why that was no longer the case is because, or that has not been the case significantly recently, is because the dynamics of the inflation that we're now dealing with is very structural. That means it's impacting food, it's pressuring on fuel, on energy, and all of those interesting things. And then people are now increasingly feeling the pressure. Households, family, individuals, institutions are now beginning to feel the pressure. Businesses, supply side, institutions are now beginning to feel the pressure of increasing cost of living or doing business. So in the sense, the argument to increase or decrease interest rates by the Bank of England, in my own opinion, is not really an argument that really holds water, because people, including institutions like the BOE, have lived their lives long enough to know that the world has changed, but they've sort of refused to advance in terms of how they review and engage economic variables like inflation. So what that means is that they greet inflation with so much economic response as well. I don't know if you get what I mean. So conventional economy says that you increase interest rates to bring down inflation, but the times we live in are very unconventional and largely driven by other non-economic or fairly close economic variables that end up impacting the core of the economy. So interest rates are necessary, but they are not sufficient to deal with the current inflation dynamics. So if the Bank of England chooses to reduce interest rate, that's still okay. If they choose to increase interest rates or whatever they want to do in the near future, I'm saying that doesn't necessarily impact significantly in the scheme of things, because the new form of inflation impacts heavily on the cost of living and the cost of doing business. And if you go outside there and you take a pulse of things, people are feeling the pain where it matters the most to their lives, regardless of what the official numbers are saying.
Indeed. So figures are changing, but the reality and the standard of living and experience of the daily man is not, from what you're saying. Hopefully we see this properly tackled. Locally, here in Nigeria and Africa, you have mentioned the impact of rising UK inflation for Nigeria, for Africa, in terms of imported inflation. How would you say Nigeria, and this is to close, Nigeria and Africa should move in the light of this, perhaps in terms of trade and how it views these other variables?
Well, to start with, you can't be a part of the global trade conversation if you don't have anything competitive enough to offer. Emphasis on the word competitive enough to offer. You might potentially have something to offer, but that thing you have to offer remains a potential on when it comes to negotiation. As far as it's not valuable and competitive, it's not a currency for that negotiation. I don't know if you get what I mean. It's not something to consider in the broader scheme of intense negotiation when it comes to moving weight, moving goods, agreeing on tariffs and all of this stuff. At best, conversations will happen to appeal to the potential, because to a large extent it will probably benefit the country B, not Nigeria significantly. So to start with, Nigeria needs to go back to the drawing board to say exactly what is our competitive approach. What are we taking to the negotiation table when it comes to trade, when it comes to, because the country is blessed with a lot of natural resource, but much more importantly, a lot of human capital resource. So what exactly are we competing with when it comes to the global landscape? When it comes to trade, when it comes to human capital, when it comes to services and all that, what are we competing and how are we competing? So you may know what exactly you want to go compete with, but then again, how do you want to compete in such a way that it's favorable to the local economy, and it also helps to boost growth, boost development, and expand local markets. These are the big conversations. So it's not necessarily about showing up at those events at the World Bank, WTO, and all those interesting, UNGA and co. It's about what competitive value proposition are you going there with, and how you negotiating in such a way that it impacts the local landscape, it strengthens market, it expands market, and it not just puts money in the pocket of in the pockets of Nigerians, but also advances Nigerians inclusively when you think about prosperity from the large scheme of things. So I would think of it more from that angle. Anything short than that will be the usual thing we've always seen, which has never really helped the Nigerian economy.
So competitive advantage and our strategy to take advantage of that. Thank you so much for your contribution on the conversation, Dr. Gospel Obele, joining us from UK, an economist. A pleasure to have you in.